Captain Aaron Holt had been a soldier for many years, dedicating his life to defending humanity in the never-ending struggle against alien forces. He had witnessed more battles, wars, and strange worlds than he could ever count. Yet nothing could prepare him for what awaited on the planet Jarak. It started like any other diplomatic mission. The Human Federation was negotiating peace with various alien races in a bid to bring stability to the galaxy. Aaron's role was simple: attend, observe, and report back. No one had anticipated that the invitation would lead him to the heart of something far more significant than just another round of talks. When Aaron received the official invitation from the Jarakthian royal family, he thought it was just another routine request. The message was clear. You are invited to attend the royal celebration of Princess Liriana's wedding on Jarak. Your presence is requested as a special guest. It seemed formal enough. He had been to several similar events, but this one felt a bit different. Jarak was a planet that Aaron had heard about only in passing. It was known for its peaceful nature and technological advancements, far beyond anything Earth had achieved. Its people, the Jarakthians, were a race of tall, elegant beings with golden skin and eyes that shimmered like the stars. Their society was based on unity, and they had an ancient history filled with both incredible achievements and dark conflicts. For years, they had been embroiled in a bitter war with another alien faction, the Zathari, and their peace talks had been fraught with difficulty. The invitation didn't mention much about the wedding, and there were no specific details about the groom, other than the fact that the princess was supposed to marry. Aaron, being a soldier, wasn't one for ceremonies. He had seen enough politics to last a lifetime, so he expected little more than a few speeches, some dancing, and maybe a banquet. He had been through hundreds of such occasions, and though they were always lavish, they were nothing more than formalities. When Aaron arrived on Jarak, he was struck by the planet's serene beauty. The city was a blend of advanced technology and ancient architecture, with towering spires reaching toward the sky. The streets were lined with flowers, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. There was no sign of war here, no violence, no conflict. Instead, the people moved through their daily lives with a calmness that Aaron had never experienced. It was a stark contrast to the chaos he often found himself in on the front lines. The welcome ceremony was grand, filled with the sounds of soft music and the harmonious voices of the Jarakthian people. Aaron was introduced to several high-ranking officials who greeted him warmly, though their smiles always seemed a little too practiced, their gestures a bit too formal. They didn't speak much of the wedding itself, only emphasizing how honored they were by his presence. The oddity of the situation began to settle into Aaron's mind, but he pushed it aside, assuming it was simply part of their culture. As the day went on, Aaron was shown to his quarters, a luxurious room with a view of the city's main square. The bed was larger than anything he had ever seen, and the furnishings were unlike anything on Earth. Everything about Jarak was so different, and yet there was a familiarity to it, like a dream of something that could have been. The evening came, and the main event was upon them. Aaron dressed in the finest attire that had been provided for him, an elaborate gown-like suit that shimmered with a strange metallic sheen. It felt strange to wear, so unlike the armor he was accustomed to. But as he looked in the mirror, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the occasion pressing on him. He made his way to the royal hall where the guests had gathered. The room was stunning, a vast space filled with floating lanterns, each one casting a soft glow over the scene. There were thousands of people, all dressed in flowing garments of varying colors, each more elegant than the last. At the front of the hall stood a raised platform where Princess Liriana was expected to appear. Aaron had heard much about her before arriving. Liriana was the heir to the throne, a woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence. She had been groomed for leadership from a young age and was revered as a symbol of hope for her people. Yet, in person, she was even more striking than he could have imagined. She wore an intricately embroidered gown made of shimmering silk, her golden hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of light. Her eyes, deep and mysterious, seemed to look straight through him. As Aaron took his place among the other guests, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the foreignness of the planet or the customs of its people. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The Jarakthians spoke in hushed tones as they looked at him, their eyes filled with a strange anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for something, something that was about to unfold, something he was unaware of. The music began and the royal procession started. Liriana was led to the stage and the guests stood in reverence. She moved with grace, her steps as fluid as the flowing rivers of Jarak. She looked every bit the princess, her face radiant with an expression of calm determination. Her gaze, however, lingered on Aaron for just a moment too long. There was something in her eyes, an emotion that Aaron couldn't place, but it sent a chill down his spine. As the ceremony progressed, Aaron felt a mounting sense of confusion. The Jarakthian officiant, an ancient being whose voice was both powerful and soothing, began speaking in a language Aaron didn't understand. He could pick out a few words here and there, but the majority of it was lost on him. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation, but he couldn't. The whispers around him grew louder, the air heavier, and his sense of reality seemed to shift. It wasn't until the officiant called for the groom to step forward that the truth began to hit him. Everyone turned to look at Aaron, and in that moment, the weight of their gaze felt unbearable. He could see the shock in the eyes of the other guests, some whispering to each other, others simply staring at him in stunned silence. Liriana, too, looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Captain Holt," the officiant's voice rang out, "you are the chosen groom, the one who will unite our people and fulfill the ancient prophecy." Aaron's heart skipped a beat. The world seemed to stop around him as the words settled in his mind. He wasn't just a guest. He wasn't just attending a wedding. He was the groom to Princess Liriana. The groom in a ceremony that was not of his choosing, in a world where he had no understanding of the rules. As the realization hit him, he turned to Liriana, his mind spinning. She met his gaze with a quiet determination, her lips trembling slightly as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Captain, but this must happen." The ceremony had begun, and Aaron was no longer an observer, he was a part of it. The fate of Jarak, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on his shoulders, and he hadn't even known the game had started. Captain Aaron Holt's mind was spinning. The realization of what was happening struck him like a heavy blow. He stood there on the raised platform of the royal hall, his heart pounding in his chest as the officiant's words echoed in his mind. The groom. He was the groom. How could this be? He looked over at Princess Liriana, standing by his side with an expression that was both calm and sad. Her golden hair shimmered under the soft light of the lanterns, and her gaze met his with a quiet intensity. She didn't seem surprised by the turn of events, but the sorrow in her eyes was undeniable. It was as if she had known this moment would come, but she never wanted it to happen this way. "Captain Holt," the officiant's voice called again, his tone booming across the hall, "will you step forward and join the princess?" Aaron felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over him. Everything around him seemed to blur, the faces of the guests fading into the background as he tried to make sense of what was happening. How could he, a soldier from Earth, be the groom in an alien wedding? How could he be part of this ceremony that felt so foreign and out of place? Without knowing what else to do, Aaron took a step forward. The crowd parted as he moved, their eyes still fixed on him. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of the galaxy itself was bearing down on him. As he reached the center of the platform, the officiant gestured for him to kneel. He did so automatically, though his thoughts were still racing. The princess, Liriana, stepped forward to stand before him. Her gown was a masterpiece of shimmering fabric, and she wore a crown made of delicate silver filigree. She was every bit the royal figure, poised and graceful, and yet there was a quiet sadness that hung over her. She lowered herself to kneel beside him, and for a moment their eyes locked. "I know this is not what you expected, Captain," Liriana said softly, her voice a mix of regret and determination. "But this ceremony is necessary for our people. The prophecy has been waiting for you." Aaron opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He had no idea what she meant by a prophecy. He had no idea why he, of all people, was the one chosen for this. All he knew was that he was caught in something much bigger than himself, something he didn't understand. The officiant raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent. Liriana stood, helping Aaron to his feet, and they turned to face the officiant together. "The union of these two souls will bring peace to the Jarakthians and end the war with the Zathari," the officiant declared. "This bond is more than just a marriage. It is a promise of unity, a promise that will last through the ages." Aaron felt like he was in a dream. He could hear the words, but they didn't make sense. He had always been a soldier trained for battle, not for this. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to make sense of the situation he found himself in. The people around him were not just observers. They were waiting for him to act, waiting for him to fulfill some role he hadn't agreed to. "You must understand," Liriana continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is not just a matter of politics. It is a matter of survival. Our people need this peace. The war with the Zathari has raged for generations. They will not stop until we are destroyed. The prophecy speaks of a human groom, and only through this union can we hope to bring an end to the conflict." Aaron's thoughts swirled in confusion. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't a prince. He was just a soldier. His life had been about orders, missions, and survival, not about prophecies and ancient ceremonies. He wanted to scream, to refuse, but there was a strange, almost magnetic pull to Liriana, something that made him hesitate. As they stood there, the officiant moved closer, and the crowd shifted in anticipation. "Will you, Captain Aaron Holt, accept this bond and unite with Princess Liriana in marriage?" Aaron felt trapped. He didn't want to be part of this, didn't want to marry someone he barely knew. But the eyes of the entire planet were upon him, and he could feel the weight of their expectations. He knew what the stakes were. If he refused, the peace he had come here to help achieve would likely slip away. The Jarakthians needed him. They needed this marriage. But how could he commit to something he didn't understand? He glanced at Liriana again. She was looking at him with quiet desperation, her eyes pleading with him to do this, to accept his role in the prophecy. She wasn't just asking for a marriage. She was asking for his help in saving her people. Aaron took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't make sense of all of it, but one thing was clear. He had no choice. His heart heavy with uncertainty, he nodded. "I accept," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange coming from his lips, and as soon as they left his mouth, a strange sense of finality settled over him. There was no turning back now. The officiant smiled and raised his hands again. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Liriana's expression softened, and for the first time she smiled at him, not with the sadness she had worn earlier, but with a genuine sense of relief. She reached out and took his hand, her grip warm but firm. As the ceremony continued, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had made his decision, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt more like a surrender. He was now bound to this alien world, to its people, and to Princess Liriana. And though he didn't fully understand it yet, he knew that his life was about to change forever. The celebrations that followed were like nothing Aaron had ever experienced. The Jarakthians had a way of turning everything into a grand spectacle, from the elaborate feast to the mesmerizing music that filled the air. There were performers in the hall, their movements graceful and fluid, their costumes sparkling in the soft light. The entire event felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But despite the beauty of it all, Aaron couldn't enjoy himself. His mind was still racing, still trying to make sense of the prophecy, the marriage, and the role he had just agreed to play. He glanced around the hall, noticing the way the guests watched him, as if they were waiting for something more than just the ceremony. Their eyes were filled with expectation, and that weight bore down on him. Liriana stayed by his side throughout the evening, her presence a constant reminder of the commitment he had made. She spoke to him softly, explaining more about her people, about the war with the Zathari, and about the ancient prophecy that had brought them together. Her words were calm, but Aaron could hear the underlying urgency in them. She was counting on him, as were the Jarakthians. They believed that this union would end the war, that peace would finally come to their world. But Aaron was not so sure. How could one marriage, one man, change the fate of an entire planet? The thought seemed impossible. Yet, here he was, standing in the center of it all, the groom in a ceremony he had never asked for, the key to a peace he didn't fully understand. As the night wore on, the weight of his decision continued to press down on him. He had accepted the marriage, but what now? What would happen when the celebration ended and the reality of his new life set in? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. The days that followed the wedding ceremony felt like a blur to Captain Aaron Holt. He had returned to his quarters on Jarak after the celebrations, his mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. The peaceful alien world, the beautiful ceremony, and the heavy weight of the vows he had taken all seemed to blend into one confusing, overwhelming experience. The strange mixture of honor, confusion, and fear gnawed at him. He had agreed to marry Princess Liriana, but he didn't feel like a groom. He felt like a pawn in a game that he didn't understand, caught in a world of prophecies, ancient rituals, and intergalactic politics. There was no escape. He was trapped in a marriage that was supposed to bring peace to the Jarakthians, but that peace felt so distant, so fragile. For the first time in his life, Aaron was beginning to question his own role in this universe. He had always been a soldier, trained to fight, to obey orders, to protect his people. He had never been taught how to navigate political alliances, especially ones as complex as this. What was expected of him now? What did his acceptance of the marriage mean for the war? What did Liriana expect from him beyond the ceremony? These questions spun around in his mind like a whirlwind, offering no answers. As the days passed, Aaron spent much of his time in his quarters, avoiding the public eye. The Jarakthian people treated him with the utmost respect, but there was a distance in their gaze, an unspoken understanding that he was not one of them, not really. He wasn't part of their world, and no matter how much they celebrated his role as their new prince, it felt like he was living a lie. The weight of their expectations hung over him like a dark cloud. Liriana had been patient with him, but even she couldn't hide her growing concern. She had given him space, understanding that the situation was overwhelming. But she could only do so much. She was the princess, the heir to the throne, and her people needed her. They needed their union to succeed, and so far it seemed like Aaron wasn't fully invested in it. One evening, as Aaron sat on the balcony of his quarters, staring out at the vast landscape of Jarak, Liriana approached him. She had always been graceful, her movements light and fluid, but tonight she seemed more hesitant. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness. "Captain," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." Aaron turned to face her, his expression guarded. He hadn't expected her to seek him out. He had assumed she would be busy with her royal duties, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Zathari. The war, the very reason for their marriage, still loomed over them, and he knew that Liriana's mind was heavy with the future. "I know this is difficult for you," Liriana continued, sitting down beside him on the balcony. "You didn't choose this life, but it is now your reality. The war with the Zathari isn't something we can avoid anymore. It will consume us if we don't act." Aaron was silent for a moment, taking in her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of responsibility that she carried. She was a leader, a ruler in every sense, and the burden of her people's survival was heavy on her shoulders. Yet he could also see the vulnerability beneath her strength, the human side of her that longed for peace, for love, for something beyond the endless struggle. "I didn't ask for any of this," Aaron finally said, his voice rough. "I didn't ask to be part of your prophecy, your war, your marriage. I'm just a soldier. I was sent here to help, not to become a part of your kingdom." Liriana nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, and I never wanted to put you in this position, but the prophecy, it has been guiding our people for centuries. We didn't choose it, we only followed it, and now it is your turn to fulfill it." "I don't understand," Aaron said, shaking his head. "What do you mean by fulfilling the prophecy? What does that have to do with me?" "The prophecy speaks of a human groom who will unite the Jarakthians and bring an end to the war," Liriana explained. "You are the one chosen to marry me, to become our ruler so that we can form an alliance with Earth. Your people will help us defeat the Zathari, and in return, we will offer you peace and cooperation." Aaron's eyes widened. He had known there was more to this than just a marriage, but he hadn't realized the full extent of it. The Jarakthians believed that their union would form the key to their victory. It was more than just symbolic, it was a political alliance that would shape the future of both their worlds. "But that's not what I signed up for," Aaron said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I came here to help, not to marry you and rule over your people. This isn't what I was trained for. I don't know how to lead a planet. I don't know how to lead a war." "You don't have to do it alone," Liriana replied gently. "I am here. I will guide you, and together we can bring peace to Jarak. We can bring peace to the galaxy." Aaron was silent for a long moment. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time since arriving on Jarak, he began to feel a flicker of hope. He had been so focused on his role as a soldier, so focused on fighting, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it meant to lead, to bring peace. "I'm not a prince," Aaron said, his voice soft but resolute. "I'm not a leader, I'm just a soldier." But I'll do whatever I can to help your people. Liriana's face softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. I believe in you, Captain, we all do. Over the next few days, Aaron began to spend more time with Liriana, learning about the Jarakthian people and their history. He was introduced to their ways of governance, their military strategies, and their plans for the war. He was surprised by how much he had to learn. The Jarakthians were a proud and ancient race, with a rich culture and a deep sense of unity. But their long-standing war with the Zathari had drained their resources, and they were on the brink of collapse. As he learned more, Aaron began to realize just how much was at stake. This wasn't just about him and Liriana. This was about the survival of an entire species, an entire planet. The Zathari were ruthless, their forces overwhelming, and the Jarakthians had been losing ground for years. If they didn't act soon, they would be wiped out. Aaron's role had become clearer now. He wasn't just a groom, he was a symbol of hope, a bridge between two worlds. His alliance with Liriana was the key to the Jarakthians' survival. He couldn't afford to be reluctant any longer. He had to step up to take responsibility to lead. But how could he? He wasn't a politician, he wasn't a ruler, he was a soldier. And yet he couldn't help but feel the pull of his duty. He had never backed down from a fight before. And this time, the fight was for something far greater than his own survival. As the days passed, Aaron found himself becoming more invested in the people of Jarak. He saw their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future. He saw their dedication to peace, their willingness to fight for what they believed in. They weren't just alien species, they were people just like him. And for the first time in a long while, Aaron felt a sense of purpose beyond the battlefield. The final preparations for the battle against the Zathari were underway. Captain Aaron Holt had never imagined that he would find himself here, standing at the center of an intergalactic war, surrounded by strange worlds and alien customs. He had come to Jarak as a soldier, sent to observe and help in a peaceful mission. But now, he was at the forefront of a struggle that would decide the fate of a planet, and perhaps the future of his own species. It had been weeks since Aaron and Princess Liriana had united, and the weight of their marriage and its political implications had settled heavily on Aaron's shoulders. What had once seemed like an unexpected twist of fate had now become a burden, one that he couldn't escape. He had agreed to marry her to help bring peace, but the more he learned about the war with the Zathari, the more he understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The Jarakthians were preparing for an all-out assault. The Zathari were ruthless, and their forces were vast. They had taken several Jarakthian colonies, and the royal family had come to the grim realization that if they didn't act quickly, Jarak itself could fall. Aaron could feel the tension in the air. The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision he made now could mean life or death for millions of people. Liriana had been tireless in her leadership, but the pressure was starting to show. Though she kept her composure, Aaron could see the worry in her eyes. She was torn between her role as a ruler and the reality of her situation. She had chosen him to be her husband and partner, but the responsibility of leading her people, of fulfilling the prophecy, was all-consuming. Aaron knew she was doing everything she could, but he also knew that they could not win this war without unity, without the help of Earth. Aaron spent most of his time in strategy meetings with Liriana and the military leaders of the Jarakthian army. They discussed their plans to fight back against the Zathari, using advanced technology and military tactics that were far beyond anything Earth had at its disposal. But even with their powerful weapons, the odds were still stacked against them. The Zathari had the advantage in numbers, and their warships were superior in speed and firepower. As the days passed, Aaron found himself becoming more involved in the leadership of Jarak. Though he was still a soldier at heart, he had taken on the role of an advisor, offering his expertise in battle strategies and his knowledge of human military tactics. He had earned the respect of the Jarakthian military, and they were beginning to see him as more than just an outsider. He was part of their cause now, and his bond with Liriana had become a symbol of the unity they so desperately needed. But even as the Jarakthians prepared for battle, the tension between Aaron and Liriana was growing. The war had placed a strain on their relationship, and despite their shared goals, there were moments when Aaron felt a growing distance between them. He had been thrust into this marriage with no choice, and while he had come to care for Liriana, he couldn't ignore the fact that their union had always been about politics and prophecy, not love. It was a difficult truth to face, especially when he saw how much Liriana had given up for the sake of her people. One night, after a long day of planning and strategizing, Aaron found himself alone in his quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of space beyond the windows. The stars twinkled in the distance, but to Aaron they seemed so far away. His thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. Could they win this war? Could they truly unite the two worlds? And if they did, what would be left of him when it was all over? A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He rose to answer it, and to his surprise, Liriana stood in the doorway. Her face was tired, but her eyes were still filled with the same determination that had first drawn him to her. "Aaron," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Can we talk?" He nodded and stepped aside to let her in. As she entered the room, he couldn't help but notice how different she looked from the strong, confident leader he had seen in the war meetings. The weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders, and in that moment she seemed so much more human to him. They sat down together, and for a few moments neither of them spoke. It was a strange kind of silence, heavy with the unspoken things that had been building between them. Finally, Liriana broke the quiet. "I know things have been difficult," she said, her voice soft but steady. "The war, the prophecy, everything. It's been so much for both of us, but I need you to know something, Aaron." Aaron looked at her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "You've been my strength," she continued. "When I thought I couldn't carry the weight of this responsibility, when I thought I would lose hope, you were there. You've helped us in ways I could never have imagined. I couldn't do this without you." Her words struck him deeply. He had always been a soldier, someone who fought for survival, someone who followed orders. But in that moment, he realized that he had become something more. He had become a partner to Liriana, not just in marriage, but in the fight for the future of her people. His role had changed, and as much as it terrified him, he couldn't turn away now. "Aaron," Liriana said, her voice trembling slightly, I know this wasn't your choice. You didn't ask for any of this. And I wish more than anything that I could have given you a different path. But this is what we have, and I need you. Jarek needs you." Her words were sincere, and Aaron could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. He didn't know if he was ready to take on this responsibility, but he also knew that he couldn't back out now. There was too much at stake. He had already committed to this cause, to her. And as much as he had tried to distance himself, he couldn't deny the connection he felt to her. "I'm here," Aaron said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I'm here for you, and I'll do whatever it takes to help you and your people." Liriana's eyes softened, and for a moment it felt like the world outside their room didn't exist. There was no war, no prophecy, no expectations, only the two of them standing together. But the peace was short-lived. Outside their quarters, the sound of alarm bells began to ring, breaking the moment. The Zathari had launched their final assault. Without a word, Aaron stood up, his military training kicking in. Liriana followed him, her face determined once more. They had no time for anything but action. The war was here, and it was time to face it. As they rushed to the war room, Aaron's mind raced. He knew that this battle would be unlike any they had fought before. It wasn't just about tactics or firepower, it was about unity. They had to bring Earth and Jarek together if they had any hope of surviving the Zathari onslaught. And that unity had to be more than just a political alliance. It had to be personal. As they entered the command center, Aaron saw the fear in the eyes of the Jarakthian officers. The Zathari were coming, and they were coming fast. But Aaron also saw something else: determination. The Jarakthians weren't ready to give up. They were ready to fight, to stand together, to protect their world. Liriana turned to him, her gaze strong. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "We either win or we lose everything." Aaron nodded, knowing that their future depended on the outcome of this battle. He stood at Liriana's side, ready to fight, ready to lead. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he was certain of one thing: they were in this together, and together they would face whatever came next.